Thanks. Minister, isn't it time to simply admit that Minister Coveney's Rebuilding Ireland plan is a total and abject failure that has failed utterly to deal with the escalating housing and homeless emergency? For over a year now, you've been talking about this plan as a panacea for the crisis, and all of the time, day by day, the situation gets worse, not better. Today, we have highlighted the fact that we have reached the shocking and unprecedented level of 7,100 people in emergency accommodation, including 2,500 children, and that the housing assistance payment support limits that you have put in place, and which indeed are a central pillar of your entire solution, so-called, to the housing crisis, are grossly inadequate for the extortionate rents that are now being charged. In my area, in the whole of South Dublin, one bedrooms within the limits today, one apartment in the whole of South Dublin. 2 bedrooms within the limits today, two residential units, against a background of an absolutely disastrous crisis. To add further insult to all of that, you have flogged off or allowed to be sold via NAMA, by the banks that we bailed out, vast amounts of property and building land, where these companies who are making extortionate profits, paying no tax on them, are jacking up rents and making people homeless. In my own area, just before Christmas, on the 23rd of December, a vulture who bought an apartment block put up the rents to the whole apartment block by up to 175% on the day your legislation was supposed to come into force. And these vultures who are doing this are paying no tax. Cerebus last year, 77 million in profit, paid €1,900 in tax. Lone Star paid 34.6 million in dividends to shareholders abroad. You have allowed that to happen. Your policy has actively facilitated that. And now you plan to worsen this situation by selling off 2/3 of public land in key sites such as Shangana Castle in Shankill in my own area, the Oscar Traynor site and other publicly owned sites, the Irish Glass Bottle, to sell off virtually the whole lot via NAMA or Cherrywood, and we only get 10% back on sites that were sold by NAMA. Will you stop this, Minister? Will you stop digging the hole that is causing such misery for people suffering from the housing crisis and change tack?
Thank you, Minister. Britain.
Well, first of all, as I indicated to Deputy Lisa Chambers, this problem requires a short, a medium and a long-term solution. And the Minister has introduced a strategy which is barely 6 months old, and it is already impacting. Now, obviously, the first step was to increase emergency accommodation, to accommodate people, and there's been 250 extra beds, the 2,000 emergency beds in Dublin. So we've had to step up the number, the provision for emergency accommodation. But that is very much an interim measure. As you know, the programme commits that by the middle of this year, you will no longer have families in bed and breakfast type accommodation. So there is a very clear commitment that there is a transition, but is moving on. The Minister has also dealt with the point of rent certainty, and we now have in place caps on rents already in Dublin and Cork, and later extending to additional areas. But most important, the Minister is committed to a supply line, which we have not had in the public sector for public housing. As I indicated to Deputy Chambers, 47,000 were committing social homes. But also we are extending the HAP, and the HAP scheme has been, despite the suggestions from one source today, HAP last year accommodated 12,000 families. So this is working. The HAP homeless element accommodated in Dublin 550 families. So this is working. But we need to continually roll that out. It is going to be extended to Dublin, as you know, in March. In terms of sites like that in my own constituency at Oscar Traynor Road and other sites. What's happening under the Minister's plan is that site, which has laid derelict for 40 years in public ownership, is now going to be built upon. And we're going to have on that site affordable rental homes, we're going to have social homes, we're going to have starter homes, we're going to have a variety of homes supplied into the market to meet huge needs that we all know about. So the alternative of the strategy of sitting on our hands, as has happened for 40 years, with that site laying derelict for all those years, is not a solution to the housing crisis. We are moving to get building happen. There is a welcome rise in housing starts in Dublin, and we need to build on that. And the Minister's strategy is committed to that approach.
Speak for themselves. The number of people in homeless accommodation has increased by 91% in the last 2 years, 34% in the last year since this government came into office. How you can possibly claim it's working is beyond me. Secondly, on the disposal of sites like Oscar Traynor or Shangana in Shankill or Nama sites in Cherrywood and so on. How, if you give these sites over to private developers, are they going to be affordable? They're not going to be affordable. You haven't defined affordable housing. What is affordable is public housing. But sites that previously would have been 100% public housing are now going to be only a third public housing, and the rest will be controlled by the private sector, and they will dictate the rents or the property prices, and they will not be affordable. It is true, and that is the fact. And in the Irish glass bottle site, what do you say about that? Only 10% of that site, a NAMA site that we paid for in this country, paid a bitter price for, is going to be in social housing. Why isn't it 100% social housing? In my own area, you keep talking about provision. We had 290 extra so-called social units last year, actually only 74 real new units, 560 people extra joined the list. Twice as many as units you provided.
Deputy, there are others who will want opportunities later. Deputy Britton.
I think Deputy Boyd Barrett wants to cling to some ideological position about how we should solve the housing crisis. It's not going to be solved by 100% social building. That won't happen. It's taking time to even get the 47,000 that we are. That's going to take time, and we need to have creative. We need to have creative solutions. And let's be absolutely honest. We need mixed housing. We need mixed housing, and on those sites you will have houses that are social homes that will be a differential rent, a traditional local authority rent. You will have houses on that site that will be affordable rent. That will be 70% of the commercial market rent, again affordable for families and designed to be affordable for families, not just those on housing lists, but another tranche of many families who are finding it increasingly difficult to get housing. So the affordable rent is directly targeting a group that needs support, and the remainder will be private housing. But we need to see private housing develop, because there are many families who aspire to family home ownership, and a starter home built on public lands is going to be a more affordable access for them than any of the alternatives. So this is a creative solution to a challenge, and I think I commend the Minister.
We now move